Good morning, everyone, and thanks for jumping on this morning. We are just kicking it off, so we are waiting for everyone to attend. We'll start rolling in, so just bear with us for the first 30 seconds, and then we'll get things started. For those that have joined early, just going to launch a quick poll for the first 30 seconds. And then we'll get underway. Good to see those answering that polling question. Appreciate that. We'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll kick things off. All right, let's get started. Thanks everyone for jumping on this morning. Look, probably wondering why we're here. Hopefully we're attending the right webinar. It's the Essential 8 Cybersecurity webinar for Virtual IT Group. So hence the reason for that first poll. Look, we want to do some quick housekeeping to kick things off. It is being recorded. So if you do miss this or have colleagues, there will be a recording up on our website on demand after this. If you do have any questions that you want to ask the speakers or the panelists, please use the chat function. You can either send them directly to the panelists and the host, or you can put them out there to everyone. There will be a couple of polls throughout the session, so please interact. We want to get everyone's feeling for what's happening out there in your own businesses. This is going to be an interactive session, and yeah, looking forward to hosting it. So we'll kick things off with our all-star lineup. We've got myself, James Allen. I'm the General Manager here at Virtual IT Group of Customer Relations. We've got Jason Jarvis, who'll be taking us through a bulk of the presentation today. He's our Head of Go-to-Market. Terry Irons, our Chief Technology Officer. Many decades in the industry, both on the business side of the fence and also on the managed services side of the fence. Not to put any pressure on you there, Terry. I can see Daniel Garcia smiling away. He's our Chief Executive Officer. Also many years of experience in the business, not only at the executive level, but also at a board level on different panels and cybersecurity functions as well for Telstra, and also globally for Kaseya's CEO board. And very fortunate today to have Daniel Safiotti. Daniel's the CEO at Western Sydney University and also one of our senior consultants here at VITG, working with all manner of business, from startup to quite established non-for-profits and listed organisations. So looking forward to the session today. We're going to go through a presentation about what is cybersecurity, the landscape today, and on the Essential 8, and we're going to wrap it up at the last half with a panel discussion where we're going to get our experts to answer those questions that you've posed, and also what we've got lined up for that we think is going to be of benefit today for you. So thanks. Okay, so a little bit about Virtual IT. I can see there's a number of clients in the session this morning, so really good to see some familiar faces and names. Also, happy to see a number of new business coming in to have a look at the session today. So for that benefit, a little bit about Virtual IT. So we've been in the industry since 2016 at our foundation, where we were founded as a managed services business at our core. The difference for that, I guess you could say, is we weren't a computer shop or systems integrator that dabbled in managed services. We started out at our foundation as a managed services provider. So having a very customer-centric, client-centric focus to the business. We are a national service provider with offices around the country. And, we have been running a couple of these events over the last 2 years in COVID, but fortunately we're going to be running some road shows face to face over the coming months as well. And for those in the non-for-profit and community services sector, those heading down to Canberra next week at the AXA conference, we'll be there face to face. So happy to come and shake your hand and have a chat finally face to face. As we say there, we are a 100% Australian-owned company. And one of the differences to our team is, we've got our service offering and service delivery at our foundation, but really what excites us is these sessions and getting that strategic business alignment with our clients, focusing on how we can build partnerships and innovation to better our business and also our clients' business, and really partner with them, which leads into the next point there around our innovation. One of the most exciting things at Virtual IT is our innovation in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space, which has been globally patented and also runs into that next point about award-winning and being globally recognised. So that's a bit of a background about us as a business. We are over 150 staff around the country, but today we're talking solely about security, and I'm going to pass it over to our Head of Go-to-Market, Jason Jarvis, to take us through the agenda. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, James. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I've just realised I'm the only one with a Britney Spears headset on, so I'll have to fix that for next time. But anyway, thanks, guys. And welcome, everybody, as James mentioned earlier. So just by way of agenda, just high level in terms of what we're going to go through, we're going to give you a bit of a state of play with regards to the cyber crime landscape in Australia. We're going to take a look at some of the cybersecurity threats, not only that have occurred in the sort of past 12 months or a couple of years, particularly during COVID, but also taking a look at 2022 and beyond as well. More importantly, we're going to discuss this concept of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's Essential 8, what that actually is and why that should be of prime importance for your business. And then we'll round it off by just some areas and tips and tricks around improving your cyber resilience in terms of the VITG approach to that, and how we can help partner with you around the security side of things to significantly improve your security posture. We'll wrap that up as James was saying, with a quick sort of summary of the presentation, and then towards the end, as we mentioned, with having both Daniels on this call with us, we're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion with them and pose some questions that we think will have some relevance to you guys in terms of understanding where things are at. So first, stepping into the cybercrime landscape in Australia in terms of what's been happening and what is happening. So I thought I'd start off with just a definition for those of you who are not aware of what it exactly is, cybercrime, and you'll see as we step through this why we're spending a little bit of time just describing what it is, because it's become a pretty dark force in today's times. So the Australian government defines it as any crimes that are aimed or directed at computers, computer systems, or other devices, such as things you've heard about hacking, ransomware, and we'll discuss a few more of these types of attacks and malware things as we go through it, and or crimes where computers or other technology devices are used. And you'll see there we talk about email scams and phishing, identity theft, and these are all things that are not only relevant and prevalent both in the business world, commercial world, but also, as you would have seen, in the personal world as well. So we'll talk more about cybercrime and where it's at, but it's been running pretty rife for some time. So just looking at some stats specifically in Australia in 2021. So there's some pretty important numbers, and for those of you who haven't seen these before, some pretty staggering numbers as well. The first one there on the top left is that self-reported losses by Australian businesses due to cybercrime in 2021 was $33 billion. Now that's a phenomenal amount, and the important thing to remember here is that that's self-reported losses. That doesn't take into account any businesses impacted by cybercrime that haven't actually reported those losses. So experts estimate that figure could be significantly higher. The average cost of a cybercrime to a business here in Australia, the number is up for conjecture. There are certain reports around having it at closer to the $100,000 mark, but there are also reports out there from IBM and PwC and the like, which have it closer to $3 million, for example. What we do know is of those self-reported losses, the average appears to be between that $250,000 to $300,000, which again is quite significant in terms of the impact of a business that cybercrime can have. A couple of the other stats there, over half of the incidents or costs rather of that $276,000 is for the detection and recovery, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go through the rest of the presentation. Also, that number around the days taken to resolve an attack, that's only based on information that's been reported, but you can see that that's 1 to 2 months potentially. But as we'll talk about later on, there are other examples where it has taken significantly longer to actually remediate from an attack. And I'll touch on the cybercrime reports numbers in a bit more detail in a second, but interesting to note that over 67,000 cybercrime reports were made in 2021. Excuse me here. There we go. So just taking a look at this in a bit more detail, and again, this slide here looks pretty full and complex, and I'm not going to sort of delve too long into any particular slide here, but the main point is that what we have seen is that there is a heck of a lot of press about, particularly as I said, the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic, but you can see that it impacts all areas of business. There's no sort of rhyme or reason to it. What we do know is that it's across the board. And the one that I will touch on there was just that article in the middle that talks about that the ANZ CEO spoke about recently, was basically talking about preparedness for cyber attacks, and he was talking about the amount invested by businesses in order to defend from cyber attacks as the number of attacks continue to grow and the threats increase. And basically what he was saying is the top end of town in Australia with regards to banking, government, defence, is spending probably an appropriate amount on cyber defence and cyber security. However, it was very clear that small medium business, which does get impacted a lot by cybercrime here in Australia, was heavily underinvested or underfunded in that. I just want to touch on a few of the major sort of data breaches that have occurred in Australia in the past 2 or 3 years. And you can see there's a few big names with regards to those. The Canva one here, that's the Australian organisation that's now global, but you can see that they were impacted with a significant number, over 100 million users were impacted by that data breach, where the hackers were able to obtain usernames and passwords, etc. The Ubiquity Networks one was interesting. Ubiquity at any one time has about or sells about 85,000 devices, 85 million devices globally, and that particular attack that happened compromised, it could potentially have been up around that 85 million sort of device mark in terms of impact. The also interesting thing there, and we'll talk about ransomware a bit later on, but you can see that the hackers demanded 50 Bitcoin in order to resolve that dispute. Ubiquity didn't end up paying that ransom, but back then, I think it was 2019 roughly, Bitcoin would have been about 60,000 US a coin. So you're talking about $3 million or there to in order to resolve that issue. A couple of other ones there, the ProctorU one, which impacted several universities, and maybe at the roundtable discussion at the end, we might just check in with Daniel Safiotti and just see whether the Western University, Western Sydney, was impacted by that. But a large number of education institutions or universities around Australia were impacted by that. And as you can see, we've also got the Australian National University on there as well. And then you have some of the health care organisations and also Service New South Wales. So again, just showing that it's pretty indiscriminate with regards to cybercrime and how rife it is in terms of what's happening there with data breaches and so forth. Obviously, a lot more examples. We will touch on a couple of others when we get to the round table discussion, but just to give you a bit of a flavour for the landscape here in Australia over the last couple of years. And apologies, I've got a bit of a lag here on the slides. Just give me a second. Okay. Just looking at cybercrime in Australia in 2022 and some of the impacts here, or some of the things we're looking at. What's clear to see is that despite the rise of cyber attacks and threats steadily increasing and growing, both in their number, their impact and frequency, as we mentioned, it appears that cybersecurity budgets or investment in defence, cyber defence, have not really risen accordingly. It's important to note that there are both direct costs and indirect costs of cybercrime as well. And we talked about those numbers earlier with regards to some of the reported losses. A lot of those will be the direct cost of cybercrime, the cost to discover, actually try and work out what's going on and then recover from those. But then you've also got the more indirect costs, which is around loss of productivity, brand, reputational risk, etc. And when we talk about a couple of the other examples during the round table, you'll see how it's far more than just the monetary cost. So what's the looking forward? What's the reality for Australian businesses as we move forward? Well, it's clear that cyber threats can strike anyone, anytime, anywhere, as we've talked about. We know that the impact can be, it can be insignificant, but it also can be catastrophic, and in some cases can be business ending with regards to the impact of cybercrime. The two sort of highest cost remediation or recovery costs associated with it are around information loss and business disruption, as we mentioned before, potentially closure. We know that entry points can vary from being physical, predominantly systems based, but now we're starting to see the spread into more of the mobile and comms and network space, as we talked about with Ubiquity, and we'll talk a little bit about mobile devices and so forth as well later on in the presentation. And then lastly, around that, we'll touch on towards the end just around cyber governance and what you can do to improve your overall cyber resilience through having or building a culture of good cyber governance into your organisation. Just those couple of stats that are there, you can read for yourself, but a very large level of attacks are targeted at small to medium businesses, and also the increase in volume, as I mentioned before. It's not only the increase in cost impact, but it's the increase in number of attacks. In 2020, there was a cybercrime reported every 10 minutes, and now in 2021, the increase in volume means that a cybercrime is now being reported every 8 minutes in Australia. So just looking at the cyber threats in particular, just to get a little bit more granular on it. So in terms of the top cyber threats, and this is over the last couple of years here, you can see that ransomware is still the number one attack being reported. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about ransomware as we go on, but clearly it's the top threat. Phishing emails and social engineering makes up the second most prevalent type of cyber threat and attack to your business. And then the other ones are the more sort of traditional ones, the bad threat actors that you've seen before with regards to viruses, adware, spyware, etc. Important to note that the main way that both the number one threat, ransomware, and threats 3, 4, and 5 into your system is typically through phishing emails of some sort into your business, that number 2. So you can start to see how important it is in terms of the top couple of threats around both ransomware and phishing emails when we talk about how you can improve your overall security posture. So just looking at 2022 and beyond in terms of what the threats are looking at and what is starting to sort of trend as we go forward. And as I mentioned earlier, ransomware and social engineering are still fairly high on the list. However, you'll see some other ones there that are also gaining prominence. The third-party exposure one is interesting because that talks about your vendors and partners and organisations that you do business with. So not only in this new world of cybercrime do we need to be aware of our own businesses and organisations, processes, procedures and systems in terms of cyber defences, but we are noticing that there is an impact potentially being felt from partners that we are doing business with. So it's even more important to make sure that your internal systems and cyber defences are in tip-top shape when you've got extraneous forces that can also impact your organisation with regards to potential cyber attack entry points. A couple of others on there on the list have started to gain some prominence. Obviously, cloud with now the movement to a lot of information being stored on cloud has meant that there's vulnerabilities in that. We've seen that with some of the recent breaches around Microsoft and so forth, and also mobile device vulnerabilities. In terms of the Internet of Things, we know that these are going to be more prevalent now as there's more and more devices. You'll start to see that starts to actually meld into the corporate environment. It's all well and good for consumers to be able to have access to the internet from anywhere at any time. In particular, it's great that you can scan the internet from your microwave or from your fridge or from your phone with a little supercomputer you have in the hand. But as business environments move to more mobile sort of bases, you can start to see that it's yet again another potential entry point for cyber attacks. So lastly, just looking at the landscape, just wanted to touch on Red Spice, which the Australian government has just announced, and you can see there that they're making a significant investment over the next few years into the Australian Signals Directorate, the government agency, around $9.9 billion investment into new national cyber intelligence capabilities. So you can start to see that not only is this becoming a critical issue for businesses and organisations with regards to how do you protect yourself from this rise in cybercrime, but you can see also that the government is heavily investing in this. It's not hard to see why when you start to have a look at some of the figures that are out there. You saw that number that I put up previously with regards to the reported economic loss for 2021 of $33 billion. Globally now, the economic loss or financial losses from cybercrime is estimated to be more than the economic loss or financial impact of the illegal drug trade. Now that's a staggering sort of claim, but that just goes to show how far cybercrime has come, how lucrative it is for the other side of the fence with regards to the sorts of money that they can make from this. To give you an example, in Australia, just to offset that $33 billion loss from cybercrime, in 2020, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, the government agency, reported that the economic loss or cost of the illegal drug trade in Australia was somewhere around the $25 billion mark. So it does give you a bit of a feel for closer to home, just why it's such a lucrative business and why the government is now stepping up to look at how they can defend, especially when you see those 67,500 reported crimes that we talked about earlier. Some 25% of those were aimed at critical infrastructure. So again, it's a really good step forward, I think, in terms of the government taking a stand and a part in it. But it's clear that businesses also, I think, need to review and look at how they're investing to protect themselves and their cyber defences moving forward. So that was a little bit of an overview of just the landscape, the cybercrime landscape in Australia. And I want to pass over to Terry now, who's going to have a chat about the Essential 8 and what's important. Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Jason. Well, it seems from the poll that at least half of you have some understanding of the Essential 8, but I'll just give a quick background just so that there's a common understanding in the group. The Essential 8 comes from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of the Australian Signals Directorate, which Jason just referred to, is about to get a huge funding injection. The ACSC is basically at the forefront of the government's efforts to protect Australian citizens and organisations from all cyber threats. Part of that strategy is a document that developed encompassing 37 mitigation strategies to help organisations protect themselves against cyber threats. The Essential 8 is born out of that, and they are the core strategies that the ACSC believe help mitigate against 80 to 85% of all threats and provide some level of protection. But as I said, there's 37 overall, but these are the ones that the ACSC have classified as essential for any organisation or even individuals. Just a quick rundown of what those controls are. So there's application control, and what that means is only allowing applications and functions on devices that are necessary to do the job required of those devices, and not letting any applications run that aren't required to reduce the vector landscape available to threats. Patching applications, for most is pretty common sense, is basically making sure that all of your applications are patched appropriately as soon as possible to effectively mitigate any vulnerabilities that have been found by the application vendors. Configuring Microsoft Office macro settings. This is a historical one in a Windows environment where Microsoft Office macros were a fairly common way in for adversaries to get into systems because they were not well protected for a long period of time. And they're still one of the key strategies that they recommend, making sure to lock that down and reduce the opportunity for malicious activity using Office macros. User application hardening, again, is making sure that only things that are meant to be happening on the devices are happening, locking down functions, things like scripting, and making sure that the device can only be doing what it's meant to be doing. Restricting administrative privileges is making sure that people can only have the level of rights to systems and data and functions that they're meant to have, and making sure that people aren't having administrative rights unnecessarily. Patching operating systems, same principle, making sure the operating systems that our devices use to function at the core level are patched appropriately and any security vulnerabilities are addressed. Multi-factor authentication, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with, is making sure that a simple username and password isn't the only way to access systems, that at least two things are used, if not more, something you have, something you know, and some, often other mechanisms as well. Biometric functions can be used, and it reduces the opportunity for compromise of credentials. And one of the reactive controls is regular backups and the ability to recover systems. So no matter how well you're protected, making sure that if something does happen, you can get back up and running as quickly as possible in an effective way. Those are the controls that are classed as essential out of the 37, as I said. A lot of people often ask us why they should implement the Essential 8. The rationale from the ACSC is that basically those Essential 8 controls, they believe, if implemented proactively, are more cost effective in terms of time, money and effort than having to respond to a large-scale security incident. So based on their experience, monitoring, working with organisations, they believe that those controls are a better mitigation strategy than waiting for something to happen and having to deal with it later on. Also, implementing the Essential 8 demonstrates to your stakeholders, whether they be internal or external, B2B customers, a commitment to protect your access and your operations from cyber threats. And that obviously gives a level of comfort both within and outside your organisation. How do you implement the Essential 8? The ACSC first published the Essential 8 maturity model in June 2017 and has been updating it ever since to keep it relevant with the current threat landscape, changing all the time. The 8 maturity model helps with the implementation of the Essential 8, but also provides a mechanism to demonstrate the level of maturity an organisation has within that framework. There's 4 maturity levels, ranging from 0, which is basically no real mitigation strategies employed, or very, very little, right up to maturity level 3, which is fully proactive. Each control has been taken to a level that is considered as good as it's going to get within the balance of time, effort and money in order to implement it. one key piece of guidance, and if you look at the table in the slide that's on the screen at the moment, while each control is individual and you can have maturity levels that vary across those controls, the ACSC advised that it's a better strategy to try and maintain a consistent maturity level across all of the 8 mitigation strategies consistently, rather than try and increase the maturity of an individual control at the expense of another one. They believe that's a better strategy for providing a more balanced level of protection against cyber threats. The common question we get asked from organisations is, what maturity level should I target? There's no simple answer to that. Obviously, it comes down to doing a risk assessment for most organisations, factoring in things like your attractiveness to adversaries, the likely adversaries you're going to come up against, and their capability and determination to compromise your systems. But general guidance from the ACSC is that maturity level 1 is generally aimed at small to medium enterprises. Maturity level 2 is aimed more for large enterprises. Maturity level 3 is aimed at critical infrastructure providers and high threat environments, government departments, large financial institutions, and things like that. Thanks, Jason.
No worries. So I guess just to add to what Terry had said there, the Essential 8 really is the baseline. If you like, it's table stakes. It's what gets you to that sort of bare minimum as recommended by the ACSC. But as Terry mentioned, there is a lot of other, there's a next tier of mitigation strategies. We talked about 37 in total. So there's another 29 that the ACSC recommends in terms of order of priority. But the actual reality is when you take a look at the information, there are literally hundreds of potential controls that can be altered and changed in order to increase your cyber resilience. But the key really is around the Essential 8, and then that next tier, as you can see in those concentric circles outside of that, in terms of layering and improving your overall security posture. And obviously the intent around that is, as I just mentioned, is that the Essential 8, whilst as Terry mentioned, the ACSC says should do a pretty good job of protecting you. We know that there are still ways of getting in to your systems, and also when you look at the flip side for the hackers and so forth, they're always trying to find new ways and methods in. So again, it's worth taking a look at, and we'll talk about that next in terms of the layered approaches. How do you move on for the Essential 8 and start to look at those that next tier of 29 mitigations. So that brings us on to just touching on how you can improve your cyber resilience in terms of what we've just spoken about with regards to the landscape and also the Essential 8. So in terms of this, managing security really is a balancing act. We realise that for organisations, there's a mixture of priorities and concerns that need to be taken into account when you start to look at security. Everything from the way that your users interact with it, to where your data is stored, how backups are performed, etc. And then some of those other pressures we talked about, external factors around governance and how you deal with that. So what we believe at VITG is you need to have a whole of business security strategy in your approach, utilising the Essential 8 as the underlying sort of baseline, as we talked about, and that means that you start to take a look at all of those areas that we mentioned in terms of those potential pressures that are coming in terms of what sort of things you should take a look at. So it's everything from that we've mentioned today, from how your data is stored, how your organisation is set up to react to cyber threats, and that, if you've heard the term security posture, is really what that means. Your security posture is your organisation's overall readiness to deal with any cyber threats and attacks. So you'll hear us talk about cyber resilience, security posture. It's an interchangeable term, and we really believe that having that whole of business security strategy is the right way to target it, using the Essential 8 as an underlying sort of basis for that. So in terms of that layered approach that we talked about, and thinking about what we just said about the Essential 8 being the baseline and table stakes, how do you sort of deal with this moving forward in terms of if you want to start down this journey of an Essential 8 based approach to security? As Terry mentioned before, your security review or audit really is your first port of call. You don't know what you don't know, so really that's about understanding and getting under the hood, if you like, in terms of what your current processes and mitigation strategies are, tool sets, software, all those things that make up a security audit or review, to get a bit of a snapshot of what your security posture is today. And then it's about a second step is establishing that Essential 8 baseline that we talked about before. So putting in those minimum recommended controls and mitigation strategies in order to significantly improve your cyber resilience from its current state, in terms of moving into that future state of at least having that baseline based on the Essential 8 principles. And then, as I mentioned before, the last phase, which really is a continual journey, is that layered security approach that we talked about earlier, with regards to, okay, so you've got the Essential 8 baseline in place. How do you improve your overall security posture when the threats, the landscape, etc., is changing and ever evolving? It's being able to stay on the forefront or on the front foot rather of that, and being able to apply a layered cybersecurity mitigation strategy or defence strategy as those things occur. And obviously, the end result of that, the outcome of that layered approach, is that you're using the Essential 8 as the underpinning sort of philosophy as a baseline to really do three things that Terry had mentioned before that the Essential 8 is designed to do, which is it's about preventing attacks, limiting the extent of those attacks that may happen, and also how do you recover the data and systems in order to get back up and running. Looking at your overall whole of business strategies, we talked about all of those areas that are potential sort of entry points, if you like, into your organisation with regards to cyber hacks, and applying that Essential 8 based security strategy across it. I just wanted to touch on governance and strategy. We can have a whole nother presentation, I think, specifically around this particular topic and its applicability to your business and the need for it and its importance. But we did want to just touch on this briefly today before we move to the roundtable portion of the discussion. Really, you know, when we take a look at the cybercrime landscape, and I know it appears it's all sort of doom and gloom, and it's only going to get worse, but the reality is that by at least starting to make that step towards using some sort of strategy, security strategy like the Essential 8 based approach, combined with some sort of governance and cyber strategy from you as an organisation, is the right step to take in preparing yourselves for those cyber attacks and improving your overall security posture, as we said before. So how do you do that? It's really about building that culture from the ground up around cybersecurity and the need for cyber defences from within the organisation, and that really needs to be led from the top of the organisation down. So, you know, your executive leadership team, senior management team, whatever you want to call them, even the board needs to make security a priority. It needs to be a standing agenda item in terms of the regular cadence and reviews. You need to be doing this review of the potential cyber risks for your organisation, and then developing your security strategies we mentioned before around how you're going to approach that to mitigate those risks. Along with the Essential 8 controls, there are some other things you need to be aware of around policies, and as we said, also the security awareness side of things when we talk about ransomware and phishing attacks. And also an important point is we believe organisations really should be starting to look at having boards that include at least some directors with some sort of cybersecurity or digital skill sets. We think that's important as things start to move. As we saw before, the cybercrime landscape is only going to get more prevalent in terms of the number of attacks, the costs to businesses and so forth. So it's how can you continue that journey around building that security mindset and culture within the business to be able to apply that and put up an adequate defence. So just to summarise what we've spoken about today. So cybercrime is the #1 economic crime in Australia, and I would dare say in most parts of the world now as well. We talked about the value of it, or the economic loss globally from it. And it's not a matter of if a cyber attack will impact your business, it's just a matter of when. We talked about the cost of those cyber attacks and how crippling they can be on a business with regards to it's not only the downtime and recovering from those things, but it's also those indirect costs that we talked about. And in our opinion, the most effective cyber resilience is to align yourselves, your organisation, with the ACSC's Essential 8 baseline principles, and then apply that layered security approach that we talked about earlier. And then just to close before we move on to the roundtable, VITGs as either an existing partner or a potential partner around security for your business, our objective is really to protect your company, its people, its brand and reputation with regards to the cybercrime landscape and its impact here in Australia. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over, James, back to you to kick off the roundtable discussion.
Thanks, Jason. That was great. Look, always can rely on Terry and Jason to provide some really good insights into this topic. So I'm sure, like everyone out there, myself, I definitely learned a couple of things today. So fantastic work, guys. Yeah, look, as Jason alluded to, we are kicking off our roundtable. So we've got Daniel Safiotti and Daniel Garcia joining us, and Terry and Jason are going to stick around. I'm going to just pop up the final poll to give people a chance to add any questions into the Q&A. But while we do that, please feel free to jump onto that poll there. Look, the first question, I'm going to throw it over to Daniel Garcia. I have to use last names today because we've got two Dans. That's okay. So look, in terms of organisations that have attended today, you know, maybe they weren't fully aware of the Essential 8, certainly not to the level that Terry dove into, and around the importance, obviously, around improving cyber resilience. What do you recommend? Like, how should they start their journey for Essential 8 alignment?
Yeah, obviously, attending webinars like today, becoming educated about what the Essential 8 is and how they can protect the organisation is extremely important, and it is probably the first step. Doing a review of what the organisation's capabilities are against those mitigation strategies is obviously essential. You need to know where you are today to understand where you need to get to, and what sorts of practices you need to put in place. Measuring a self-measurement of your security posture is important. Using external organisations can sometimes provide a different lens and a different perspective. Sometimes you may feel you've got some protections in place, but when it's reviewed from an external party, you might realise that what you thought was protecting you in a certain way might not be.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Thanks for that, Dan. Look, you probably didn't expect us to get away with a roundtable without having a COVID-related question. So apologies in advance, but it is fairly topical given cybersecurity and what it's where it's put us, especially from an operational perspective in the tech space. So I might throw this one over to Daniel Safiotti first in relation to going into that living with the pandemic phase. It's clear that some things have indelibly changed, in terms of how we work. So going forward, with a lot of the workforce is now remote, distributed, or having that hybrid style arrangement, what are some of the challenges that you see facing organisations as they continue to move forward, especially in the space obviously around security?
Well, thanks for the question, and great question. I figured probably the best way to answer this question is to give you some context within my organisation. So just to give you a sense, we've got 50,000 students, thereabouts, and we've got about 5,000 staff. So we're a large, complicated organisation. And I think I would say a few things about working from home. I mean, right now, our staff have got the ability to have this hybrid arrangement whereby they spend some days on campus and some days not on campus. And, you know, over the course of the last few years, we've had a lot of challenges in this space. You know, firstly, that the proficiency of our personnel to understand a number of security topics and concepts is just more often not there. We talk about phishing, we talk about ransomware, but for many folks, that's not particularly well understood. And so I think from our perspective, the thing we've learned is the emphasis on training and education, and that's quite good given the fact we're an educational institution. I think the other learning that we've taken away is you simply can't trust the environments that people are working from. Typically there are networks which may be unsecured, you have devices that are probably not as protected as you would like. That acts as another vector into your environment if not particularly well managed. And I think probably the biggest thing for us is people like to find effective ways to work. And more often than not, the tool set that they're using is or want to use is not compatible with the organization. And so what we have found is there's been this significant rise in wanting to use cloud services, sometimes not provisioned by us. And we've had to find ways to provide solutions and insight and education into practices that sort of work here. The most important defense for us as an organization is obviously username password pairs. And so for work from home, it's critical that those credentials be always respected. And for us, we layer that respect with multi-factor authentication and other authentication techniques. So I think that's what I would say. But it's a constant learning experience. The world moves quickly, and so we as an organisation have to evolve with it as well.
Yeah, fantastic observation. We're definitely seeing a lot of that within the clients that we're looking after as well. So you've definitely covered that off there, Daniel. Thanks for that. Look, in terms of the information that we've gone through today, we have covered off obviously a lot, and we're hoping that it's obviously raised some awareness around the cybercrime landscape in Australia, and obviously the importance, you know, around the ACSC's Essential 8 mitigation strategies. So maybe Daniel Garcia, if you want to just answer this next one, I'll throw it to you first. If we've got some time, I move on to Daniel Safiotti. Just if you had to summarise, you know, 2 to 3 things that, you know, attendees could implement, you know, some like quick wins or low-hanging fruit to significantly improve their security posture. You know, what would they be?
Yeah, thanks, James. As I sort of mentioned earlier, one of the critical aspects that I like to talk to customers about is getting that baseline review conducted. Now, that's something that we offer to our clients. It's an essential document and understanding of where you are today. And as I mentioned, the Essential 8 is a great target state. It's something that's highly recommended by the Australian government, but you need to understand what current protections you have in place today and how effective they are working for you. So conducting that security review is highly recommended. As Daniel sort of alluded to, education is key. And it's something that you know, Daniel and I work together across many different organizations, and it's something that we both have very shared aligned values, that education is utmost importance, because you can put as many controls as you want in place, but one of the biggest vulnerabilities is the people. And if we can educate the people behind those PCs, laptops or mobile phones, you go a long way in protecting the organization as well. So an effective ongoing education program is critical as well. And obviously, Jason mentioned it in the presentation. It's not a matter of if you will be affected. It is a matter of when. And there's a lot of controls you can put in place, but one to ensure that the business can continue to operate under duress would be looking and investigating in cyber security insurances. So making sure that you've got the right protections in place should that occur, to make sure that your livelihood and your business does not become insolvent through that process.
I'm going to add a few things from a tactical perspective, Daniel. So the health and hygiene of environments is of paramount importance. You'd be surprised, but there's lots of environments whereby people simply just don't patch. And I think establishing a regular cadence around patching applications and operating systems is really important. And there are instances here, for example, in this large organization whereby we don't always get patching right. So having a high regard for patching is probably the most useful thing you can do tactically. And also, I think, investing effort and resources into protecting your front door. So this is ingress and egress paths to the big bad world from your services, wherever they may happen to be. And so to do this, enhanced logging and detection systems are probably really critical. People tend to underestimate the value of logs until they actually really need them. So managing those logs is probably also very important to do. I've got a few extra points around this. Making sure you have a strong business continuity plan and actually testing it and reviewing it with some degree of regularity is important. But I happen to think probably the most important thing that you can do tactically is actually have the discussions. Now, more often than not in organizations, these topics tend to be only had in IT portfolios. Having discussion at the executive level of the organization, at audit and risk committees, or whatever your equivalent may happen to be, is really critical to bringing some light into this topic area and actually dealing with some of the big issues that arise.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, and it is heartening to see a lot of the clients that we are talking to are starting to make these, have these conversations internally at the board level, like Jason mentioned in the presentation, having those standing agendas. So I think communication about this topic is key. It's very important. And yeah, some really good points there, Mr. Garcia as well. Thank you. Look, moving on to the current conflict over in the Ukraine with Russia. So, I mean, we've probably all heard about it on the news. That cyber warfare, digital tactics, are being deployed and can even have a risk over here in Australia because of our involvement to some level. And all sounds a bit otherworldly, Star Wars style. I'd love to get your take on it, both Dan's. What the serious implications are from a conflict on the other side of the world, and how it could impact businesses over here in Australia.
Well, I'll probably start, and I'll start by saying the Australian government's taking it seriously. So I would advise that all small, medium, large businesses also take it seriously. Now, this is not new. There was some significant attacks conducted probably about 12 months ago by Russia, and this has been continuing. And obviously now with the current conflict and being so, I guess, open about what's going on, I think Russia has increased its targets. They're not just targeting government organizations or agencies. They are targeting small to medium enterprises. It is generating revenue for them. As Jason sort of talked about, there are lots of people out there who pay the ransom because they've brought their business to their knees. So this is a profitable, organized crime, and it will continue to be conducted. And it's not just targeting large enterprise or government organizations. Yeah.
When the matter around Russia and the Ukraine became center stage or the news, we took the matter very, very seriously here at Western Sydney University. It began for us with a series of briefings to our executive. It then was followed up with a number of campaigns to alert our staff as to potential risks. And then, of course, there was a significant effort in ensuring that the things that we do actually were going to protect us and stand up if the situation did arise. Do we anticipate being attacked as a result of this war abroad? I would say it's unlikely. But hackers, computer crime does not sleep. It does not respect the boundaries of geography, and it can happen at any time. And so, if anything, I think that the events abroad really heighten and focus organizations' awareness of the importance of security, and actually, in most cases, creates good behaviors that result in terms of taking the matter seriously and dealing with it. So, whilst the events overseas are problematic and troublesome and very unfortunate, it is clear we are taking the matter seriously, and I think it's a good, healthy behaviour for Australian organisations to follow suit.
Yeah, it's very true. But as both Dan's pointed to, not only the government but organisations now taking this very seriously, and we are seeing that echoed through the client base. So it's good having these types of forums and these types of initiatives, out there within the marketplace to heighten the awareness. So yeah, fantastic, guys. Look, we'll move on to ransomware. Daniel, I see you touched on those attacks from Russia last year. And Jason rightly so pointed out that ransomware is still continues to be the top of the charts, effectively in terms of cybercrime. So can you give us some examples of some of the recent ones, importantly, like that have affected domestic businesses and organisations over here? Maybe Mr. Garcia starts, then followed by Dan Safiotti.
Yeah, look, one of the most high-profile ones that we definitely took a lot of notes from is the JBS Foods, and they are one of the world's largest meat and food processing companies around the world, and that impacted not only their American facilities but also the Australian facilities. They've got 11,000 workers in 47 meat processing facilities, and that's just in country. There's 250,000 employees around the world, and again, that impacted their operations in North America but also in Australia. This shut down all their meatworks facilities, and you can imagine what an organisation that size, what that means for that business. They end up paying the ransom, and it was $11 million US. And that's because it was there was no way that they saw a solution other than paying that ransom and getting back to business. And no organisation wants to be put into that position. And although all the details aren't necessarily published, it's something that a lot of organisations can look at as a reference point and say, if we have the essential aid, I know that I will significantly reduce my risk of that happening to my business.
We think a lot about ransomware here, and we have not had a significant, crossing fingers, a significant incident of such nature here. But the time will come, and I think the most important thing we've done as an organisation, there's two important things, is number one, establish whether or not we would pay in the event that we did receive ransomware. So in our organisation's manifesto now, we've got a clear sense of what we would do in the event of a ransomware attack at this organisation, and that's good. The other thing too is we've actually played out what a ransomware attack may look like and how it would tie into institutional processes if it were to arise. And that's worked really well for us to improve understanding. The higher education sector is always under attack. We've seen great Australian universities, like the Australian National University, be subjected to incredible attacks over a period of time. The Australian Catholic University, the Uni SA, and it's not just domestically, it's abroad as well. There are others in New Zealand and pretty much the States. We're not immune as a sector. And I think as a result, having those practices around evaluating and testing what we would do in such scenarios is really important. But again, I can't accentuate enough the importance of making sure staff understand cybersecurity concepts, making sure staff can decipher the phishing, ransomware emails that they get and react accordingly and deal with it accordingly. It's really about having that business continuity posture in your organization and being able to respond in a structured manner when an event arises. And of course, there are the tools that we would use, whether it be endpoint detection and response tools from various manufacturers to basically protect the most susceptible devices that we happen to have.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. Both Daniels there. Look, we have just hit the hour, so I'm going to respect your time and we'll wrap it up in just a minute. Before we do close, just want to thank all of our speakers and panelists. Really appreciate the effort and you coming along to deliver that content. I'm sure it's very much appreciated across the base. And also thank the guests for attending today. Now, just lastly, some next steps for those that have attended. What you can do to review your own security posture is for existing virtual IT clients, book in a security review with your CSM or myself directly if need be. And we will do that Essential 8 audit for you. And for those new to VRTG, obviously we're welcoming new conversations and always happy to have those discussions. For the first 7, just obviously given resource constraints, you'll contact us. We'll do those reviews for free. So please reach out. There was a couple of questions in the chat. I believe we covered them off through the questions that got answered with Daniel, and also to come back to the question about slides. Yes, after the webinar, we'll be shooting those out. So thanks again, everyone, for attending. Really appreciate the time today. Enjoy the rest of your day and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
See you, everyone.